After hours of meeting in the demilitarized zone that separates the two Koreas today, North Korea agreed to send athletes to next month's Winter Olympics in South Korea. Senior officials from both countries also agreed to hold further talks to reduce months of military tensions. Today's talks may represent the first concrete step away from confrontation. It was the first time officials of the rival countries sat for high-level talks in more than 2 years.
The relations between the two Koreas are frozen up more than this winter's weather. Despite the cold, Korean people express strong zeal for the improvement of inter-Korean ties.
There is a saying in our country that a start means it is half done. It is hoped that we hold this dialogue with such strong will and perseverance.
After meeting behind closed doors for 11 hours, the two sides agreed to hold military talks to ease border tensions. The North also said it's restoring a military hotline with the South. And it pledged to send a delegation to next month's Winter Olympic Games in South Korea. People on the streets in both Pyongyang and Seoul said they welcome the talks and the outcome.
Every Korean really wants relations between the North and South to improve. It's urgent.
I think this is a chance for Korea, the only divided country in the world, to relieve tensions. I hope the talks will bring peace and compromise between the two Koreas.
But the Wall Street Journal's Andrew Jung, speaking via Skype from Seoul, says one key topic wasn't addressed.
The North appeared not willing to discuss the nuclear weapons issue, which is, I guess, at the heart of everyone's minds when looking at North Korea. And there was no specific agreement on when and if the two Koreas would discuss the issue.
The top North Korean delegate did give this assurance to the South.
Regarding the nuclear issues, our strategic weapons, including atomic bomb, hydrogen bomb, and intercontinental ballistic missiles, are only aimed at the United States, not our brethren.
President Trump and North Korea's Kim have regularly traded threats and insults. But on Saturday, Mr. Trump suggested he would be open to his own talks with the North Korean leader.
Sure, I always believe in talking. Absolutely, I would do that. No problem with that at all.
The State Department called today's talks between the two Koreas a good first step. That came up again at today's White House briefing with Press Secretary Sarah Sanders.
The North Korean participation is an opportunity for the regime to see the value of ending its international isolation by denuclearizing. We hope that we can continue to move forward on that front.
The UN Secretary General also praised the turn of events. And so how big a breakthrough was today's meeting? Kathleen Stevens spent 35 years in the Foreign Service, and she was U.S. Ambassador to South Korea from 2008 to 2011. She later served under President Obama as Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. She is now a fellow at Stanford University. Ambassador Kathleen Stevens, welcome back to the NewsHour. So what do you make of today's meeting and what apparently was agreed to?
Well, I do think it was a good first step, to quote my former employer. I think this is an important development today and an all too rare positive development in a couple of ways. First, I think South Korea, and I think you saw that reflected in the comments from South Korean citizens, South Korea has to be very pleased and relieved that the Winter Olympics, which they're hosting 1 month from today, is the opening ceremony, now looks set to potentially be hosted with less tension, less threat of disruption or spoiling from North Korea, and with North Korean participation. This is the first thing that South Korea's new president, Moon Jae-in, has been able to, if you like, deliver in terms of his desire and his promise to try to re-engage with North Korea. But it is indeed a modest step, but an important one.
So a positive development, we don't know what it'll mean in the long term, but that in the short term, you're saying a positive development. What about, though, the fact, Ambassador Stevens, that the big sticking point between the United States and North Korea, their nuclear program, their missile program, didn't come up?
In a sense, I don't think that's surprising. North Korea has long taken the position that the issue of its nuclear and missile program is one to be dealt with the United States. The Republic of Korea, as the U.S. ally, has made clear it's a concern to them too. And I do note that the South Korean delegate made that point today. But this notion that the weapons are about the threat from the United States is a longstanding North Korean point, and I'm not surprised that they made it again. I do not see any evidence that they are ready to come to the table to talk about denuclearization, and that is indeed the huge looming challenge that still remains before us.
So the North Koreans are sticking to their guns, so to speak. The U.S. is saying it's sticking to its position. You don't see any movement, any glimmer, positive glimmer there at all?
Well, no, I think there's a very positive and much needed step of at least cracking open the door of some dialogue. And it is appropriate that it begin between the two Koreas. This is the Korean Peninsula. These are the people who have suffered the most from the division and the continued state of tensions and indeed a virtual war over the decades. But it needs to be the first step towards towards creating the atmosphere where I would hope that by spring, perhaps some kind of dialogue is possible. Now, that said, I can't imagine that North Korea's lack of demands today is going to continue forever. Once the Olympics are over, I think we're in for a period perhaps of some reduced tensions, of some confidence building, which is a positive thing. But by the spring, there'll be some important questions there about future military exercises, about the sanctions, and indeed about any future testing of nuclear devices or missiles.
And on the other hand, though, you have this week reporting from the Wall Street Journal that there is discussion inside the Trump administration about the possibility of targeted strikes on North Korea by the United States, perhaps at one of their military sites, missile sites. What would that mean if that happened?
Well, it is indeed a very risky strategy in my view. Successive American administrations have looked at the notion of some kind of limited strike, limited military action, and have judged on every occasion that the stakes are simply too high of a full-blown and disastrous war on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. I think that would remain the calculation of this American administration. But that kind of talk is indeed unnerving in South Korea. And indeed in North Korea, and could well figure into Kim Jong-un's own calculations that perhaps this is the time, when he is also under increasing pressure from sanctions, to try to put out a bit of an olive branch, to indeed put it out to his, as he puts it, his South Korean brethren, and to see if he can appeal, if you like, to the very natural desire for reconciliation, but eventually, and for peace, but in the meantime, for some reduction of tensions between the two Koreas.
Well, it was sobering. Sobering story certainly got our attention along with these talks. Former Ambassador Kathleen Stevens, we thank you.
Thank you.